Chauffers who drive around rich people, what are some of the weird shocking conversations you have overheard? About 25 years ago I had a summer job at a very tony country club. 6-figure joining fee, 5-figure continuing membership dues, and that got you nothing but the privilege of paying top dollar for ounce, food, etc. I was a porter some of the time, as we had cottages on club grounds for members to stay and make a weekend of it. One of my duties was driving members to and from airports, usually private airports for private jets. One time I'm driving 2 guys to the airport, and one of them starts complaining. Seems he and his wife are always fighting over who gets the jet every weekend, and where they want to go. Well, the other one replied, my 3rd jet is actually just gathering dust right now, since my son went to college. Wanna take it off my hands? They shook on it right there in the van. Not a chauffeur, but seemed like a good chance to remind people of the story of John Boner, at the time, Speaker of the US House of Representatives, 3rd in line for the US presidency, not knowing how to use Uber. As the story goes, one of his aides downloaded the app onto his phone and showed him how to use it. Unknown to him, he'd been stuck on the carpooling option, Uber Pool. That's what he used for years. There are all sorts of tales of commuters hopping into their carpool and bam, there's John Boner stuck in a middle seat asking to get dropped off at the Capitol building. However you feel about his politics, I think that's pretty funny. I've had multiple people pay me handsomely to let them smoke weed in the car. Heard a French guy yelling at his wife that $10,000 was too much to pay for 2 bracelets that she bought. Also overheard a lot business deals with absurd amount of money referenced. Like tens of millions. When we were in high school, my friend used to caddy at a local country club. One guy really liked him and asked if he would be willing to drive him around while he went out partying. This was like 2003 and in a pretty rural area. My friend agreed. He picked the guy up at like 8 PM. Right off the bat, the guy handed him $200. He went to a bar for a little bit. My friend sat in the car. The guy came out, handed him another $200 and told him he had to visit his friend real quick. He went and got a bunch of coke. They went to another bar. He handed my friend another $100 and told him to look out the window and turn up the radio. He then blew several lines. He came out a couple hours later with a girl. He was married with kids. He handed my friend another $200 and they went back to her house. After they ducked, he came out and asked to be taken to the beach. At this point it was like 2 to 3 AM. My friend said that the guy slowly walked around the beach, went into the water up to his ankles, in his shoes, threw a bunch of rocks into the water and then sat in the sand for about 45 minutes. He came back to the car and asked to be driven home. When they got out of the car he hugged my friend and gave him $500 and asked him to never tell anyone what happened. None of us really believed my friend when this happened until the guy he drove got arrested for assault and possession of cocaine like 6 months later. Not sure if I qualify, but I did drive Uber Black for a while and had a few interesting situations. One time I was driving a young woman and right before the destination she screamed for me to pull over. When I asked her what was wrong she pointed to the couple that was kissing in front of the building. Apparently the man was her fiancé. She didn't get out, she didn't cry, but she did ask if I could take her back to where I picked her up. I'll never forget her face, it was the saddest face I have ever seen in person. Another time I was picking up a group of guys outside a club early in the morning, and as the first guy stumbled in a Glock fell out of his coat pocket. We just locked eyes and I said, hope that's not for me haha. I was nervous and didn't really know what to do say. Probably my favorite was picking up 2 college-aged girls from what I can only assume was a party. They were very drunk, and the second girl was basically completely gone. They were going all the way to Ridgewood, which was almost an hour. Girl A was pretty talkative and funny. Girl B looked to be completely passed out sleeping and didn't move the whole trip. We made it to Ridgewood, and girl B sits up suddenly, looks around, opens the door, and vomits everywhere. She seemed fine after that, but I just kept thanking her for making it the whole way and not throwing up all over my car. I used to drive limousine and taxi. One time I got the manager of a fairly famous Canadian band in my car asking me where to buy coke. I had no idea where and I told him that, so his bright idea was to find a prostitute, hire her and ask her. I told him I couldn't help him pick up prostitutes either. He was disappointed but understood. He had me drive down a well-known street until he saw a prostitute. He asked me to pull over, got out of the taxi, paid the fare, and then immediately flagged me down again as a new ride. I knew what was up, but whatever. He gets back into the car with the prostitute and she tells him exactly what house to go to for some coke. I take them there and wait a bit. They come back out and I drive him back to the venue. Then he offers me 2 free tickets to the show, which I gladly accepted as love that band and had seen them 3 times. Alas, since I was still working during the show, I gave them away to 2 friends who had never seen the band. They had a good time and I had a fun story to share with them about how I scored those tickets. Not really a shocking conversation and hardly a famous person, but it was interesting how easily and full of trust people can be about searching out and buying Drew Guts in a strange city. For the record, this was 2003. Buddy of mine ended up picking up a Netflix producer while doing Uber. He said they had a great conversation as he brought him to his hotel. The producer invited him up for a drink, and since my friend was a film student he thought it'd be a good idea to go and try to get some good networking in. They hung out for about an hour when he asked my friend if he knew of any massage places with happy endings. He didn't, but the guy paid him $500 to bring him to the closest massage place, which was only a few miles out. Upon dropping him off he gave my buddy a card and said, "There's a big party festival I'm hosting. That's your ticket in. I'll let you know then if I get that happy ending." Haha, he got the happy ending. My dad was a chauffeur when I was younger and he told me of one story driving the director of a company down the road with the Blackpool illuminations in the company limousine. The director was standing up out of the sunroof with his arms out waving at people as he drove past. What the people on the street didn't know is that in the back of the limo there were 2 prostitutes blowing him. Not a chauffeur, and I was a participant in this conversation. I used to tutor an oligarch's daughter in Ryblevka, the wealthy suburb outside Moscow. One day she mentioned that she likes to ski. I asked her which kind of skiing she preferred. Downhill is more popular where I'm from, but cross-country is quite popular in Russia. It's even part of some schools' curricula. Her answer? My favorite kind of skiing is the type where you jump out of a helicopter. Silly me, I forgot about that kind. Friend of mine worked for an upscale concierge chauffeur service. His most memorable moment came when he lost Marie Osmond. Fairly simple gig, go to airport and pick up Marie Osmond, who was to be the featured entertainer at a private event. Plane comes in, he meets her, she has carry-on bag but her checked suitcase, containing her stage dresses and makeup, is missing. She is unflappable, though, asks to be taken to the nearest upscale mall. He does as instructed. She goes into a large upscale department store, selects 2 long sequined cocktail dresses and goes to the fitting room to try them on, without him, of course. Unfortunately, there are 2 entrances and exits to the fitting room, and Marie Osmond exits out through the other side and cannot find my chauffeur buddy, who is waiting patiently on the side she'd entered. 20 minutes passes. He thinks something has gone wrong, so he grabs a female manager and asks her to go into the fitting rooms and ask for Marie Osmond. The manager thinks she is being pranked and declines. Chauffeur buddy is in mini panic mode now, running wildly around the store asking random customers, "Have you seen Marie Osmond? Have you seen Marie Osmond?" Store security is summoned and he is asked to leave the premises right now. He calls his employer and tells them he has lost Marie Osmond. The employer doesn't have her cell phone number but has her agent's number and he is not accepting calls. She has in the meantime taken a cab to the gig, thinking she has been forgotten. Lots of apologies eventually ensued and there were no repercussions. I used to know a chauffeur. He ended up driving around some big stars. He was big dude, like 6 feet 8 inches and super muscular. His best story was when he was driving around a few WWE, WWF back then, stars, and they awkwardly asked him to not get out and open the door for them because he'd make them look smaller. Wasn't exactly a chauffeur, but I did have the distinguished privilege of working with a multimillionaire one time for a couple days, and I was just astounded at how out of touch he was with people. One conversation he was talking about how he hated all the new homes they were building and he liked old castles, so he was having a castle in Scotland disassembled and reassembled here in the US piece by piece. On another occasion he asked me why I wasn't in college yet. The job was after high school and I was working as a plumber, and gave me an alright when I told him I couldn't afford to go yet and had to save up. This is not a limo story, but this thread reminded me of a rich guy story. My daughter played soccer for many years, and at one practice, a guy drove up in a Ferrari, got out, and started talking to another of the dads on the team. After a few minutes, the guy left and another of the dads went over there and asked him who that guy was. He replied that the guy was his lawyer or something. I come to find out years later that that guy in the Ferrari was a multi-millionaire, had one and only one client, that dad. And his only job was to handle the dad's charitable donations. So this dude got filthy rich donating millions of dollars of somebody else's money and taking a percentage off the top. The dad, who was apparently worth several $100 million, never came across as rich at all. He wore sweats too and was at every practice and game. He drove a Camry. Had been married to his average looking wife for like 25 years. Stuff like that. Acted like a normal guy like the rest of us. One of my best friends used to drive Uber in a wealthy area of LA. He told me so many stories about drunk celebs and TikTokers in his car. Someone offered him a bag of weed because they felt sorry for their friend throwing up in the backseat. Most people were just normal though. Some highlights. Quentin Tarantino and Trisha Paytas were making out in his backseat when they were secretly dating. Lol. Mike Tyson is apparently very nice in person and also a giant pothead. Somebody on Gossip Girl and her friend were arguing about chicken nuggets and tried to get him to go through a Wendy's drive-thru during the lunch rush when there were 10 cars already in line. Addison Rae or one of her friends took their shoes off and left them in the car. Leo DiCaprio took more than 5 minutes to find the car. He seemed out of it and was quietly bobbing his head listening to music on his headphones. There's a very popular celeb gossip Instagram that posts blinds people send in. Many different girls have sent in stories about sleeping with Leonardo DiCaprio. These stories always say that the entire time they're ducking he is wearing headphones. One girl mentioned that at one point he was sort of singing along. I absolutely believe it and I want to know what his deal is and what he's even listening to. Not a chauffeur. A small part of my family was Chicago Mafia. Grandpa told me a story of a family wedding in Chicago they went to in the late 60s. They were picked up at the airport by a limo with some high-ranking family members. On the way to the hotel they were stopped about 8 times by various police officers. The officer would walk up to the driver's window. The chauffeur would reach into a money bag and pass a bill to the officer. Nothing would be said and they'd take off again. Eventually my grandpa asked if they were being bribed. His cousin, Mafia, laughed and said, "No, it's Thursday. That's when we pay our boys, so I guess that's how they did it. Looks like a traffic stop and in the open where it's not unexpected. So I'd imagine that chauffeur had seen some things." I was driving as Uber and I picked up 2 businessmen in an industrial park. They were building developers. The man who was clearly the boss spoke to me as if I were a man and I was always the driver who picked him up. Although they were clearly from the Middle East, they chose to speak English. Maybe they thought it was rude not to, being in the US? But if that would have been rude, I'm not sure what the rest of the conversation was. They spoke about the future of business as if it were also futile and how everyone will be either very wealthy, like them, or very poor, and how their children really won't be able to get jobs either but also won't need to. I logged more than 4,000 rides between 2015 and 2017 and that was one of the weirdest. The other weirdest guy I picked up from a dispensary. He was really good looking, very well dressed, and clearly well to do, but he was in some kind of mental distress. He wanted to visit more dispensaries but had clearly already bought the maximum. I got his hotel information through conversation and went there instead. On the way, he told me, in all seriousness, all about how his father was God, which meant he was Jesus. Didn't you notice how much brighter the sun became when I got in your car?" He was serious. He also followed Guns N' Roses like they were the Grateful Dead. He thought Axl Rose was the smartest man alive. He didn't really notice when we got to his hotel instead of the dispensary. I did ask him if he had taken any other drugs that day and he insisted he hadn't. That was also one of the weirdest. Not a driver, but I used to caddy at a fairly exclusive country club in Massachusetts. It's the kind of place where, no matter how rich you are, you can't buy a membership. You're either born into it or you marry a member. As a result, a lot of the members like to show off their influence by inviting guests who would otherwise be unable to play at the club. Someone invited Mitt Romney. We were given a heads up that the governor, he wasn't a senator yet, would be coming and they wanted us to know how to act around him. We were told he wanted to be treated like anyone else but they didn't want us to gawk. So, I guess to make sure us dumb caddies weren't gawking, we were instructed to not look at or acknowledge the governor. Because this is precisely how we would treat other people. I did get to shake his hand and chat a little bit. He was friendly, personable, way nicer than a lot of the members. I still don't like a lot of his politics but he seemed nice enough in person. Picked up a wedding party, bride, bridesmaid, and bride's boyfriend who was paying for the wedding. They had a magnum of champagne and we drove around for quite some time while they snorted cocaine in the back. They were using rolled up $50s and $20s, then tossing them to me in the front seat as tip money. I dutifully brushed off each bill and added them to my wallet, pretending not to know what was going on. The couple argued off and on about showing up to the wedding. Apparently she felt weird about getting married and he was trying to convince her it was a good idea. Finally dropped them off at the church and he slipped me a matchbook with his name and number written on it. Yeah, it was the late 80s and I was a young woman, one of the only female limo drivers at the time in that city. Scored a sweet leather jacket with the tips from that night. So many weird stories. Edit, boyfriend and groom were not the same person. Not a conversation and not me, but definitely weird, shocking, and disgusting. A friend of mine who worked in music was in a limo with Robin Thicke and a load of dancers and models driving round London. They're all just chatting and whatnot, and out of nowhere, Robin Thicke just starts going down on one of the models. There was an awkward split-second silence, and then everyone just carried on and ignored it. Many years ago I had a security job that included among my duties the occasional responsibility of driving our rich clients around. I would typically drive them in my employer's Cadillac Escalade that we had for those types of requests so there was no divider between the front and back seat like in a limo. These were mega rich people who treated me politely but quickly forgot I was present. I overheard conversations about lots of shady and illegal financial stuff. I overheard clients talking about insider trading, embezzlement, price fixing and stock pumping. I also heard some speaking openly about extramarital affairs, sexual exploits and expressing racist, sexist and homophobic attitudes. All of this was done with me sitting a couple of feet away in the driver's seat like I was a piece of furniture instead of an actual human being with ears. I drove Uber part-time on Sat nights. I would start the app directly in front of one bar in Hoboken. That was the bar that the Fox News people go to so long rides. Meet on-air and behind-the-scene talent. One night was bring back on of the on-air talent. A woman, and no I won't say which, there were 3 guys with her on the ride. After I dropped her off at her home the 3 guys basically came to the conclusion that all 3 were not being invited in and also that they were drunk and she had been the one who set the destination. They ended up hailing an Uber which was mine and I drove them home. So there you go. At least one woman who is on the air at Fox News basically convinced 3 men that there would be a gangbang and decided that there would not be. Not laughing was one of the hardest things I have done in my life. I had a job as a runner. I would pick up music artists from the airport and drive them to the venue, among other things. I won't name the artists, but I picked up one duo from the airport in an Escalade. It was raining heavy that day and I had the windshield wipers on next to full. It created a beat. One of the guys has a small, handheld sampler and starts making beats in time with the windshield wipers. All of us were driving along, bouncing to the rhythms. It was sweet. Another time, I was driving a famous songwriter guitarist back to the airport after the gig with his family in a 15-seater van. His family was telling him how great he was, but dude is old. All he could say was, what, and how it dawned on me he couldn't hear. Bob Percy Plant can't hear sheet. I have a ton of other stories, including how I got involved, but I'm not sure if anyone wants to hear them. I was an Uber driver in Boston for a while. I had accepted a pool trip near Southie and picked up my first passenger, a Spanish-speaking woman with broken English. My next stop was at T-Bus Barn. I've picked up bus drivers before, and that's where the pickup location showed on my app. Upon arriving, I waited for a minute or so and got a call. It was the woman I was supposed to pick up. Where are you? Why are you stopped and not here where I am? I asked what a location was and she screamed something about being across from a Starbucks. So I googled the nearest Starbucks and drove there. I was already close. I stopped directly across from the Starbucks and saw no one. So I called her. Lady, where are you? I'm across from the Starbucks. I don't see you, lady, I'm right ducking there. Where are you? Miss, I think you need to find another driver, and I cancelled her trip. All of a sudden, from the sidewalk bus waiting shelter, emerges this angry woman screaming and shouting, I'm right here. I'm right ducking here. I take off and book it. Running a red light to boot. It was like 3 AM. The Spanish lady in the back said, I'm very happy she didn't make it inside. I laughed and the trip finished peacefully. I drove the chancellor for a large university around and was told to actively forget everything I heard in the car. Throughout my undergrad career I constantly heard about massive cuts to the humanities and fine arts budgets because we simply didn't have the money. Multiple buildings worth of people were forced to share a single, outdated building during 5-year-long renovations. Graduate students and university staff were criminally underpaid and underfunded. RAs were screwed out of salaries when the campus closed despite protections in their contracts. All in the name of budget shortages. I overheard the chancellor and the head of the athletics department discussing an enormous, multi-million-dollar training facility that was being commissioned on land that we were buying off campus. Our current training facilities are fairly new and our sports teams do not draw any crowds. We also bought an entire campus over 100 miles away. Duck this place, and duck the administration. He shared a stock I should invest in, Teladoc. He told me his wife doesn't have sex with him anymore. She was in the back seat. Their rich friends puked shellfish in the back seat. He hires Anthony Bourdain's, RIP, food scout to travel the world and try interesting dishes, no matter the price. $10,000 for a roll of sushi? Done it. I drove a 180-inch super stretch Cadillac Fleetwood Brougham in the mid-90s. There was this elderly Japanese gentleman who would fly into our city several times a month, on his own Gulfstream no less. I believe he was an early video game developer. Always dressed to the nines, tons of bling, a different Patek Philippe watch every time. He always traveled with a young male intern, usually the same one for a few trips, then a new one the next month. He would get in the car, exchange a few pleasantries and then close the divider for the 45 drive into the city. Even with the divider closed I could usually still hear muffled conversation. One time I thought I heard different sounds though and I noted the whole car, despite weighing about 8 tons, was rocking side to side. The first thing that came to my mind, naive me back then, was that the old man had a heart attack and the young man was doing CPR. I lowered the divider to see if he was okay. Well, he wasn't having a heart attack and they both had happy looks on their faces. I said, hey, are you guys forget it. I put the divider back up and kept driving, wondering how much room it was going to take to wash that mental image out of my cerebral cortex. I estimated a lot and I was right. When we got to the hotel they both acted like nothing happened, although I noted the intern was walking a bit funny. Edit, corrected high-end watch brand. Thanks Siri. Not a chauffeur, but this happened because of a lack of one. Basically, a guy I used to know back when we were teenagers, 17 years old, had a lot of money. We just never knew how much until I was invited to go on holiday with him and some other friends. All expenses paid, of course. Anyway, we took a taxi to an area where this guy wanted to buy an apartment and wanted to show us, so we went with him and ended up spending the whole day walking around the area. We got tired and eventually wanted to go back to the house, but we were so far away that walking was not an option unless we wanted to walk for about 3 hours. Neither of us had enough cash to pay for a taxi, and back then taxis didn't accept cards. This was around 2000 or 2001 BTW. So this guy rings his dad and asks if he could send a chauffeur to pick us up, but the chauffeur turns out was busy doing some deliveries for the dad. So instead the dad says there's a Mercedes-Benz dealer shop near where you are. I know the manager there as I've bought several cars from them. Just go there and buy a car with the credit card. You can leave it in the house and we'll figure out how to bring it home later. So we went to this dealer shop and somehow in about 30 minutes the manager did all the paperwork and we ended up driving back to the house in a brand new Mercedes C-Class, which we used for the rest of the holiday. Just had to share this. A co-worker of mine was telling how on his side gig as an Uber driver, he had picked up one of the receivers for our local NFL team. He complained that he had driven this man for a half hour and didn't even get a tip or a good rating. That asshole just signed a $6 million contract and he couldn't even tip me. Then he added how he trash talked the NFL guy's abilities during the whole ride. Sometimes life gives us reasons to smile. Not all of them were rich, but a few were rich. I drove my boss friends around so they could meet up and swing. Sometimes they'd rent out a space by a local lake and sometimes it'd be at a normal upper middle class looking home. Other times it'd be a home where floor to ceiling glass windows meant 30 feet in the air and formed a triangle at the top, giant residential mansions. 90% of the driving around was to either pick up people, drop people off, getting lube or red stripe beer. One time I ordered 100 taquitos from Whataburger the morning after. I'm sorry guys, nothing too weird about it, beyond buying stuff from 6 shops, but people did prefer to be picked up and dropped off alone or with their +1. Carpooling was a big no-no. Nobody wore robes, but I did see some people had those masquerade ball masks. People were friendly and talkative before being dropped off. Normally slept on the ride home. Few occasions that stuck out was a guy who had taken Viagra for the first time and told me all about it, and another guy who took his contacts out beforehand and always asked to borrow my contact solution and case. If you hadn't known they were swingers, you'd think they were just hiring a designated driver to keep people from getting DUIs. Especially because none of them were particularly attractive, at least to me. Not a chauffeur but worked as a caterer for private jets and the insane folks who owned them. Had a huge order from what I knew to be a smaller jet, so I really wondered about it. When one of the owner's handlers was training a new flight crew, he ordered $12K of meals for a flight that didn't exist just so the new flight attendants could practice the fine points of checking in a catering order. I listened outside after the food drop as the handler started explaining what to do to 6 of the most beautiful humans I have ever seen. We provided food for a lesson. The food was wasted. I found it in the dumpster outside one of the hangars the next day. Not a driver, but this lady once had a chauffeur who did not pay attention to the road and wouldn't stop talking about a specialized pet store him and his roommate were going to open while taking her to the airport. He instantly developed a strong obsession with her, fantasized about their life together and even stalked her across the country to deliver an item of luggage he thought she left at the terminal. Guy was super dumb too. I was driving the CEO of a large company around to a few meetings. As soon as he got in the car, his phone rang and I overheard him spend about $30 million on a collection of a few old Rolls-Royce cars. $30 million spent in less than 10 minutes. Back in the late 1970s I worked as a carpet cleaner for a company whose clientele was exclusively in Beverly Hills and Bel Air, California. I've been in the back door of some of the most fabulous mansions in America. One morning I got sent to a Beverly Hills house owned by a rich guy named Irving Chandler, as in the Los Angeles Opera House, the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. That family of Chandlers. So, I'm in the kitchen getting my machinery set up when Irving himself comes shuffling in, wearing pajamas and slippers, to get a cup of coffee. Indicating me, he asks the cook, "Who's this carpet cleaner?" he's told. So, Irving sits down at a little table with a wall telephone, pulls a notepad and pencil from his pocket and makes a phone call. My ears perk up. He calls a Beverly Hills bank and gets put right through to some big shot, saying, "Hi, Don. It's Irving. Chandler. Fine, you? Listen, I'm calling about that guy of yours who has been after me to make an early payoff for that loan I made last year. Why is he bothering me about this now? I was really listening." He went on, "Well, sure, I could pay it off right now, but what's the big deal? Hell, it's only $280,000, only $280,000. I was getting paid $4.50 an hour to suck the dirt out of his rugs." My uncle drove limousines for a while some years back. He had regular clients, like General Schwarzkopf. But one night he took a new client out. The guy asked my uncle to drive him to the bank and then take him home. When the guy called a second, third, fourth, fifth time, my uncle gladly drove him because he tipped really well. Then the cops showed up at my uncle's house accusing him of being an accomplice to a bunch of recent local bank robberies. He somehow managed to convince the cops that he had no idea that the guy he was driving was robbing the banks. He just took him there and drove him home and got a nice tip. My uncle also had some amazing stories about being a truck driver for Budweiser, but I guess I should save that for a different sub. I once worked at a really exclusive club in Massachusetts, the kind you have to be born into and/or have generational wealth to be voted into membership by the board. Drew Barrymore was a frequent guest and there was always a lot of tension between her and her ex, who always came with his extremely young new GF wife. She wasn't super friendly, no one was supposed to acknowledge they recognized her, seemed constantly stressed, and I felt kind of bad for her. Didn't seem like a fun life. Mitt Romney, Morgan Freeman, and a bunch of big time athletes were also frequent guests. Someone got married at our club and spent over $2 million on the wedding. They flew out the event planners for Coachella to design every aspect of the wedding. It was a spectacular wedding and one of the most fun nights I've ever had. However, at the end of the night, the front desk saw the groom go home with one of the bridesmaids instead of the bride. I helped set up and cater this one member's garden party. A casual affair for them that must have cost tens of thousands. They had a well-known music group come play for their guests and I got to play cornhole with said group during the luncheon, which was pretty cool. So many wealthy kids with rich kid problems and wildly different upbringings. Parents would constantly talk and quiz their kids on politics, history, science, etc. One group of guys was challenging their teenage sons to come up with a business idea. The boy with the best idea would receive $1 million for startup costs. Kids talked stocks constantly at the dinner table. Teenagers would come to eat with their friends, drink, and drop a casual $15,000 bill on their parents' tab. Just such a stark contrast from the way I was raised, where money was a taboo topic and my weekly $2 allowance for a week's worth of chores made me feel rich. It was a small island with an equally small nightlife, so for fun, we would grab a drink and an ice cream cone, and hop on the yachts and sailboats parked at the docks. We'd explore and pretend we were sailors or captains for the night. Once we hopped on Johnny Depp's super yacht while he was out at dinner. We actually managed to hang out for a hot minute before security finally kicked us off. While looking for a tennis partner, I met this truly lovely couple who basically adopted me. I would bike to their house to play matches on their backyard tennis court every day. They loved to take me out to eat at these incredible restaurants. As a foodie, I was in heaven. They let me drive their cars on the beach, use their surfboards, drive their jet ski. I ran out of gas in the middle of the ocean and had to get rescued by the Coast Guard, took me out on their yacht, and even flew me out on their private jet to nearby islands to explore in the morning, and would then fly me back in time for my job at the club. They were the most kind and wonderful people and never asked for anything but my company in return. I think they missed their daughters who both lived out of state. I fell out of touch with them, but I think of them often and hope they are doing well. Drove LIMO at Marquette University during undergrad and grad school. Some of the students that went there were obscenely wealthy. Limos are the vans that drive drunk students anywhere on campus and a few blocks outside of campus. Couple things I remember randomly from it. Drunk guy leaves his wallet on a van and another driver calls it in so me and another supervisor can take it to campus police. We pick up the wallet from the driver and open it to get the student ID so they know who to email. There had to be a few grand in there, and when we called the kid to tell him about it he told us we could just keep it because it was too far from his dorm to bother picking up. I picked up a couple girls from HEO and they spent the entire ride talking about how it was ridiculous that one of the girls' parents planned on making her pay for her own apartment after graduation and there was nothing even livable under $2K a month. The school is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Mardi Gras is the name of a campus ministry trip where you use your spring break to build houses and drink in somewhere that doesn't get snow in April. One of the people on my van was getting a free night of drinks from his buddies because he paid for everyone's trips. I think it was like $1,500 per person. Rich kids are rich, but foreign rich kids are usually on a different level. Was talking to a guy from Spain who said his dad did something with movies over there, IDK. He had an actual Rolex on and ended the conversation with "So anyways, do you know where to find any meth? It is a free service and a frat star tried to pay me for the ride with a Ziploc baggie of cocaine." I said no and he called me a legend and left a $20 in the cuff holder before I realized it.